We use AI for no, pretty much everything these days, don't we? Drafting emails, getting images, even helping write code. But what's really going on inside our heads,
Mm.
in our brains, when we let AI do the heavy lifting, the thinking part? Is there like a hidden cost to all this convenience? Today, we're doing a deep dive, a really fascinating one, into AI-assisted writing, memory, and how we actually learn stuff.
Yeah, and to get into this, we've got a great mix of sources. There's this really lively Reddit discussion, the kind that gets everyone talking. And then there's the actual research paper from MIT that sparked it all. It gets right down into the brain data, the neurophysiology. So it's this blend of what people are buzzing about online and the hard science behind it.
Right. And our goal or mission today is to really unpack the surprising things coming out of this, help you see the different sides, the nuances, and, give you some food for thought about how these tools might be shaping how we think.
Oh, and before we jump right in, just a quick heads up. You can grab a special discount on the AI course over at rajamanikam.com. Just use the coupon code QPT, that's QSIP-T, at rajamanikam.com.
Okay, so let's get into it. It really started with this claim from that Reddit post that just took off online. The headline basically screamed, MIT found students using ChatGPT to write essays, couldn't remember anything from them, like zero recall. And that's a pretty big claim.
It is a big claim,
Yeah.
and the main point people latched onto on Reddit was this idea, okay, maybe the final essay looks fine, the product is okay, but the process, the actual work of writing it, which is, let's face it, how we learn from writing essays, that gets totally short-circuited. It's less about the paper you turn in and more about, the mental workout you got doing it.
Yeah, and you saw that reaction instantly on Reddit, didn't you?
Yeah.
People saying, like, no kidding, or, well, yeah, they didn't write it. Why would they remember it?
Right.
It feels almost obvious to some people. If you didn't put in the effort, you wouldn't really internalize it. But is it that simple?
It does seem kind of intuitive, right? But the educators chiming in on that thread, they went deeper. They really hammered home that the whole point of writing an essay isn't just to, generate a document. It's the intellectual labor, the mental effort. Someone used this fantastic analogy. They said something like, the point of writing essays in college isn't to produce an essay, just like the point of doing squats isn't just to lift weights up and down. The goal is the process itself, making your brain work, synthesize ideas, build arguments. It's like a mental strength training.
That really nails the exercise that counts. And speaking of benefits, that Reddit discussion also talked about the long term, the skills you build analyzing, coming up with a thesis, trying to prove it. One called it a superpower. Skills that apparently stick with you for decades, even if you forget the exact details of, say, some history essay you wrote. It builds your critical thinking foundation. So when you hear that, what really jumps out at you, this idea that the process is king for learning no matter the tool, is the output always just secondary? Or are there times when getting the output is the main thing and AI is just a tool for that? Or is it always a trade-off when it comes to really learning something?
That's really the core question, isn't it? It boils down to why you're doing the task in the first place. If the goal is deep learning, really internalizing something, then yeah, the process, the struggle is probably essential. But if you just need to generate some text fast for a purpose that isn't about deep learning, well, AI is incredibly effective.
All right.
What this MIT paper suggests, though, is that for the kind of learning involved in essay writing, yeah, there seems to be a real cost, a trade-off.
Right. So moving from the online buzz to the actual science, the MIT paper, how did they actually test this stuff? What was the setup?
Yeah, the study design was quite neat, actually. They took participants and split them into 3 groups. One group used an LLM, specifically ChatGPT in this case. That was the LLM group. Another group, the search engine group, could use Google, Bing, whatever, anything except an LLM. And the third group, the brain-only group, had to rely just on what they already knew. No outside help. And crucially, everyone wore these EEG headsets while they worked. These measure brain activity, the electrical signal, basically watching them think.
Wow. EEG headsets. And what were they actually doing while hooked up to these things?
They were writing essays, standardized prompts, kind of like you'd see on the SATs. Things like, does true loyalty require unconditional support, or is having too many choices a problem? They had a 20-minute time limit for each essay, and afterwards they were interviewed about the essays they'd just written. The study followed them across a few sessions, and interestingly, in an optional 4th session, some groups switched tools, which gave even more comparisons.
Okay, so they write the essays, then they get interviewed. What did those interviews show? Did it back up the Reddit claims about memory? Like, did people actually forget what they supposedly wrote?
It really did. The results on memory were, well, pretty stark. Here's the key finding. The LLM group did significantly worse when asked to recall a correct quote from the essay they had just much worse than both the search engine group and the brain-only group. Their ability to remember specific details from their own writing was just demonstrably lower. The data showed a really clear failure rate there for the LLM.
Whoa. That's a massive difference. What does that even mean for like how we grade things if the person can't remember it? And what about feeling like it was their work?
Yeah.
Did using AI change that sense of ownership?
That was another really interesting behavioral finding. Ownership. The brain-only group. Overwhelmingly, they felt the essays were theirs. 16 out of 18 said full ownership. Makes sense, right? They did all the work. But the LLM group, totally different story. It was split. About half claimed full ownership, sure, but the other half said only partial ownership, or get this, no ownership at all. 3 people in that group literally said, nope, not mine. The search engine group was somewhere in between those two extremes. So what's really striking here is seeing direct evidence that, yeah, outsourcing that mental work doesn't just affect memory, it affects our psychological connection to what we create. It makes you ask, what do we really learn or even own when the AI does the heavy lift?
That disconnect is kind of profound, isn't it? Like being a bystander to your own creation. Did the study mention anything else from the interviews, like how the participants felt?
Yeah, there were some interesting tidbits. For example, the brain-only folks often mentioned feeling frustrated by the time limit, wishing they had more time to think and write. Standard writer frustration, maybe. But what was really telling was that some LLM users, especially later in the study, seemed to almost realize what they were missing. Some actually started moving away from using the AI for things like introductions in later sessions. They mentioned valuing the process of coming up with their own ideas more. It's like they started to miss that feeling of mental engagement.
Okay, so the behavior, the memory, the ownership, it all points to a difference. But what about the brain itself? What did the EEG data show? Does the MIT study give us clues from the actual brain activity, the neurology, that explains why this is happening?
This is where it gets really fascinating, because the EEG gives us a peek under the hood. So it provides the why. When they compared the brain-only group to the LLM group, the difference was huge. The brain-only participants showed significantly more brain activity across all frequency bands, alpha, beta, theta, delta. Their brains were firing intensely. You saw widespread communication between different brain regions. It signals deep cognitive work planning, thinking creatively, forming memory. The LLM group, much less of that intense neural activity. Their brains were essentially quieter in those key areas. It suggests they were doing less of that complex human thinking because the AI was handling a lot of the synthesis and planning. The different brain waves, like theta and alpha, linked to cognitive load and internal focus, were just way more active in the brain owner.
Wow. So the brain literally just chills out a bit when the AI steps in. Makes sense if it's doing the work.
Yeah.
But what about compared to just using Google? And we all do that, right? Look stuff up instead of remembering it.
Yeah, good question. It was a similar pattern, though maybe less extreme than the brain-only group still showed more extensive, stronger brain, especially in those slower brains, the delta theta band, which are linked to more episodic memory. The search engine group was definitely active, but showed less of that deep neural network. Suggests they were also offloading cognitive, but more to external ritual finding rather than generating. It really demonstrates that Google effect, where we remember where the but not necessarily. So if you connect the dots here, the brain data really backs up the idea that our brains adapt to how it's like training a muscle. If you let an AI do the high-level planning or synthesize your brain might allocate, and over time, those neural pathways strengthen. The study even when produced AI, sometimes that suggests
this is definitely giving us a lot to chew on. And, we should also remember what some people on Reddit pointed out. It's important context. This paper is a preprint. It hasn't gone through the whole formal peer review process yet. So this is still very much research in progress.
Absolutely. That's a crucial caveat. It's early days for this kind of specific neurocognitive research on LLMs, but the findings are provocative. And it's also important to bring in some nuance, right? While this study raises flags about cognitive offloading, other research actually suggests that using AI moderately can sometimes help learning, particularly if you use it in what some call a brain-to-LLM way, where the human is still driving, still actively reviewing, questioning, refining what the AI gives back. And actually, this MIT study itself found that the group that switched to that kind of brain-to-LLM approach in the 4th session actually showed improved performance. So it's definitely not a black and white AI bad for brains situation. It's about how we use it.
Right? The how seems critical. It's not just if you use it, but the way you interact with it. The study also dug into some subtle things using natural language processing on the essays themselves, like biases.
Yeah, they did. They found, for instance, that the LLM group tended to use the most named entity, people, places, and there were differences in word patterns, what they call N-group. One interesting the search engine. On the topic of philanthropy, they ended up using terms related to homeless quite a lot, even though giving was really relevant to the prompt. The research speculated search engine dynamics like higher search volume or ad bids as charities forward, a kind of subtle advertising bias. And it touches on this broader concern about echo chambers or algorithms. LLMs tend to give you one synthesized data, which might maybe inadvertently discourage you from exploring different angles or critically. And this could subtly shape what information based on the priorities of AI developers, shareholders, who decides what to quietly powerful.
And thinking about costs beyond just our brains, the paper mentioned something else pretty significant: energy.
Yeah, that was striking too. They pointed out that running an LM query takes about 10 times more energy than a standard Google search. We're talking zero point 0.3 watt hours versus maybe 0.03. So it's not just a cognitive cost we're potentially dealing with. There's a real environmental material cost too.
Well,
And ultimately, we as users, as consumers, will probably end up footing that bill indirectly somehow. It broadens the whole picture, which really brings us back to a fundamental question, I think, for all of us. How do we strike that balance between the incredible convenience and power these AI tools offer, which is undeniable, and the critical need to keep developing our own thinking skills, our cognitive autonomy, our ability to think critically and independently? How do we use the tool without letting the tool use us, or without costing the planet too much?
Yeah, this whole exploration today really highlights that when it comes down to learning, really knowing something, it's often not just about the final product, the thing you create, but that whole messy, effortful process of engaging with ideas and discovering things for yourself.
And the findings from this research really prompt us to think about how we're, training our own brains in this AI era. Are we actively engaging using these tools to push our own thinking further? Or are we maybe delegating a bit too much, letting those cognitive muscles atrophy?
So maybe a final thought for you to consider as you go about your own work, your own learning. Take a second to think about the skills you really want to truly own, and then think about the role different tools, AI included, play in that. Are you using the tool to enhance your brain's workout, or are you letting the tool do all the heavy lifting? We'd genuinely love to hear what you think about all this. What's your experience been using AI for learning or writing? Drop your thoughts, your questions in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget, if you're interested in that AI course, head over to rogermanicam.com and use the code QPT for a discount. That's rogermanicam.com. Coupon code QBAUT-PNR2. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.